Redeemer, and Sanctifier. Please be seated. I don't know about you, but every time I hear scripture like the ones we heard today, it makes me want to plug my ears. End times. We Episcopalians are not comfortable with apocalyptic readings. Am I right? Is this something? Yes, we are not comfortable with this at all. I think that's because we have this image of what it means when someone starts talking about apocalyptic scriptures. And people who talk a lot about it may have a very different tradition than we do, and we immediately shut down and say, no, that's not us, right? And sometimes, and I don't know about you, I even stop hearing what the scripture is actually trying to say, and I really struggled with that this past week. This is a scripture that is truly about faith and hope. Hold on. I'll get there. So, this is about believing in a God that is always, no matter what, is about redemption, resurrection, and love. No matter what's happening. You have to know that the message of Luke, this piece of scripture, was written 10 years after the destruction of the temple. So it was really written in what feels like the ashes and dust of this grand temple had come down. Now, let me tell you about this temple. This temple was really grand. Herod the Great, the same Herod that we didn't think was so great at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, restored parts of the temple, making it larger. And he employed artisans from all over the world. And he brought the best materials from all over the world, creating this temple. It had marble that was 57 feet long and 12 feet high. The walls were marble. And on them, they had tapestries from all over the world. And in the entrance, there was this veil. There was this veil that was made out of linen, and it was a beautiful tapestry made out of linen from Babylonia. And so here in the doors were ornate and had gold plating on them and silver plating. And it lasted 8 years before the Roman Empire quashed, got rid of, destroyed a revolt. And we know of all these pieces, and communities like the Christian community of Luke knew about the destruction of the temple and its grandeur because pieces of the temple went across the world. So imagine that's the background of today's gospel. You can imagine that the disciples were there and they know something is going to happen. It must be in the air that something is going to happen. And so there's anxiety and fear in the air. And this is Jesus' last sermon to them. Letting them know that everything they know about the temple and their faith and Jesus may change. And they were hopeful in that environment. They believed that God's wisdom will be with them. That's what Jesus says. God's wisdom will be with you. You will hear God's wisdom with you no matter what happens. So this is a hopeful message that they are called to have faith, even though all the signs are pointing in the opposite direction. That they will have faith to believe in a God that is about resurrection and redemption and love. That's pretty amazing, bold action, right? Think about that. In the midst of all that points in other directions, that they will have hope and faith. There's this book, Audacity of Hope, right? Well, it is kind of an audacious thing. It's kind of an audacious thing to hope in the midst of that. That book, written by Barack Obama, was actually written, the title came from a sermon. It came from a sermon of Jeremiah Wright, the UCC pastor in Chicago, and his sermon was Audacity to Hope. Basically on the same themes we're talking about today. Jeremiah Wright had seen this painting called Faith. And in this painting is a woman who clearly has been through quite a bit. And she has bandages, and she has bandages over her eyes, and she's kind of leaning on the ground, and she's holding a harp or some sort of string instrument. We're not sure which one, right? And all there is one chord left. And she's plucking this chord and looking up, and the painting's called Faith. That even in the midst of that moment, whatever it was must have been pretty destruction-oriented. She was praying and praising God, believing in that God of redemption and resurrection and love. That's audacity, right? The audacity to hope. We, as a community of people, have seen ups and downs of this world, have we not? We've seen it in our own lives. Maybe you have had a moment in your life where everything just becomes chaos, and the direction you were going, you're suddenly 180 in a different direction. And you're like, what do I do now? Ever experienced moments like that? Yeah. And as we, as a pandemic people, have certainly come to realize that we live in a world where the world could stop, right? And things that we've come to rely on and consistency in our lives can suddenly change. I mean, even look at our faith community today. We're very different than we were when we first entered the pandemic in many different ways. But here, in the midst of that, inching out of what it feels like inching out of it, right? The pandemic, we have the audacity to hope. We've named this is stewardship season, as you all might be aware, and we've named this stewardship season about hope, right? Because we are called to be disciples of hope and love, no matter what is happening. And that's who we are. I can look around, and those people who I know your stories, I know pieces of your lives that you have really struggled and worked together with this community to create spaces of hope and light despite what is happening, because what is happening, because that's who we are, right? We are a people of love and hope. And as we inch out of this pandemic, I have a charge for you. In your bulletin, I'm going to invite you to do something this week. I'm giving you homework. Now, that's what you get when you have a rector who once was a teacher. On page 15, the last part, I want to point out this blessing. This blessing has been used during this season of creation. It's been a blessing in my life, and many of you shared how it's been a blessing in your life to hear it Sunday in and out. I'm going to invite for you to pray this prayer every single day this next week. Because what's happening in the stewardship season is the time where we think about where St. Paul's is called to be in the future. It's the time where we think about, as a community, what we will offer together in our time, talent, and treasure to make up this vision for next year. And this prayer, pointing to the last paragraph, and may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. That part right there. Perhaps it's not foolishness. Perhaps it's audacity. audacity of our hope and our faith. So I invite you to pray that this week. To ask how we as a community are called to inch forward into this world that is a post-Christian world, right? In a post-pandemic world, in this world that is going to change our church. But we have a space because God has a plan for us to continue to be that space of light and love for the community and the world and ourselves. So, may we be audacious, faith, hopeful believers.